What is it ultimately about the trialing and testing that speaks to you more so than the hunting just by itself?
I mean, there's a lot of different things, I think. But for someone coming in as a new person, I think it can be easier to get into a community with a trialing group or testing group and have that support kind of right away. Whereas, because if you didn't grow up hunting like I didn't, how are you going to meet a hunting community, right? Like maybe your Department of Natural Resources has an intro to hunting event and you go there and you meet people, but or maybe you know some friend of a friend who's going to take you hunting, but otherwise, like where do you meet people? So whereas if you show up to a hunt test or a NAVTA training day or a club that has a training day, you're kind of it's a little bit easier to get hooked in, I think. And obviously I've built friendships and stuff through those communities, so that's important to me. One of the other really things that I like about testing and trialing is it gives you very clear goals. So there's, if you're going to train for especially any of the upper level tests, there's very specific things that you need to do with your dog. And if you're training for hunting, like you can train your dog to be steady to wing shot and fall and retrieve to hand and back the brace mates and all sorts of things. But I just think, when you have a judge judging on those things, like the bar is set. So for me, I'm very goal oriented. Like I need a deadline or I need something to kind of motivate me to work on that kind of stuff. If I was just training for hunting, I don't think I would have done half the stuff I did with Zara because there would have been no real reason for it and there was no deadline.
And I think both are fair points. And I want to stick on the goals first, but then I want to circle back and come back to the community. The goals, it's really interesting is when I first got into this again, I came through it to where I wanted the world's best hunting dog, the perfect hunting dog. And at the time I thought that you got into it and you needed all of those skill sets that NAVDA espouses or any of these hunt tests and trials, and then come to find out like a lot of the best just meat dogs, the hunting dogs, the ones that you drop on the ground and like in the hunting field, you're like, man, that dog really knows his job. It's almost more or less just genetics and exposure. It's
Hmm.
almost like the people with those dogs that truly only care about hunting. It's like they don't really have much training involved. It's like they
Yeah.
just go out and they just let it unfold and go through it. I mean, they may teach whoa, they may do some small things, but the testing and trialing community, it definitely, if part of the thing that the draw that brings you to this world is the dogs, to your point that you almost have to go to the trial and testing area to find it. But I find it interesting that throughout that process, while some people are developing their dogs, they almost lose some of the hunt in their dog. And
Sure.
so it's almost like by getting the quote unquote like groomed, trained, high level dog, it's almost like you lose the actual hunting element of the dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent. I mean, I think it really depends on the person and the dog. And
Hmm.
I mean, there's plenty of people that compete, like myself and you and others that also hunt. There's just because someone tests and trials doesn't mean they don't hunt, or vice versa. Although I know plenty of people that compete and they really don't hunt.
Hmm.
That's just something they don't do. So, but I think a lot of people probably, if they do are really into tests and trials and they compete at the upper levels, I think when they go hunting, the context is a little different. I think, not to speak for other people, but I think they probably have somewhat different rules, I'm guessing. For me, I know I've kind of fallen into that by accident. Like we hunt primarily woodcock in North Carolina. That's the main bird we have there. When I first started hunting, Zara was steady to wing shot and fall on woodcock, but that quickly eroded.
Yeah.
Now she'll break it to flush.
Yep.
But on pen raised birds, she's steady. So I personally, and this is something I'm going to try to do differently with the next dog, is to enforce the rules a little bit more. But I think when you're hunting, it's so easy to not enforce those rules.
Yeah.
Just because things are happening so fast. If you're also trying to shoot and there's other people involved, it's just hard to be, oh, my dog took a step, like I'm not going to shoot. It's
Yeah. You don't start recognizing things like that unless you do both. And this kind of goes both ways to where you have people that only hunt and they don't test or trial, but then they'll pass judgment on the people that test and trial and say that, oh, their dogs can't hunt. Then vice versa, you have the people that, some people that do the testing and trialing, and they're just, they look down at the, blue collar guy down the road that just wants to hunt and he doesn't really have any flashy obedience, but you know what, that dog will go produce more birds than their trial dog. Then I think the majority of the people kind of end up in the middle of
Yeah.
all that, to where I think that the majority of the people that come into the space that does, let's just say, nabbed and hunt test, they will go do hunting as well. So they kind of want a little bit both sides of it. But until you're in that element, you don't recognize that we can train this dog to a super high level and degree here in the training field. Rachel's the same way, to where I can go place and plant some birds out there with launchers, whatever,
Hmm.
and she's going to be completely steady. You go put her in the grouse woods, that bird's coming up and she's breaking.
Yeah.
And you just kind of have to decide, do you care about that or not? Like, what is your priority? Is your priority more about the trial and testing, or is it about the hunting? Or, to what we just talked about, you can kind of just do both, and the dogs kind of figure out that they're smart enough to recognize that this one's a game over here and this one's actually hunting.
Yeah, and I have seen that with my own dog. I mean, part of me wonders if I'm losing something there, like losing something, for example, on the steadiness end by letting her be not steady on wild birds. But honestly, I really haven't. Like I've been able to run her in a field trial in the middle of hunting season, and she's been fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, everyone talks about in dog training how dogs are very context specific. So I think the dogs can tell the difference between, especially like at a field trial, there's horses, like you're running big versus like we're going to the woods to hunt woodcock,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a trial or test, you're playing the game in dirty fields. There's old scent, there's four-wheeler scent, horse scent, other dogs, other people. You can't tell me that the dogs don't pick up on that. It goes into what I talk about. I've said it a few times in recent episodes, is like, is your dog really as smart as you claim they are, or are they not? Because if I go drop my dog in the woods, they know the difference between woods that people have already gone through, a bunch of other dogs, horses, four wheelers, whatever, and woods that are just completely clean, and they have to go smell a bird,
Yeah.
right? If they can smell, a 6 ounce bird in the middle of cover and stop on point, I'm pretty sure they can smell all of the other distractions or things that came beforehand. I think they can delineate the difference between a training field and an actual hunting field.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the more experienced the dog is, the better they are at that, right? If you have a 2-year-old dog that hasn't had a lot of maybe hunting experience or trialing experience or one or the other, they might not be be able to tell the difference as clearly as like an 8-year-old that's been doing both their whole lives, for example.